Welcome again to my channel. I hope everybody is having a great evening. This evening, it is Monday evening. We are going to be continuing with the reading of The Guardian, written by Nicholas Sparks. Now, we have been reading this book for about 2 weeks, and I don't know if you all have been enjoying it as much as I've been enjoying it, but I've been enjoying this book immensely, and it's my absolute pleasure sharing this reading with you all. And I hope you all are enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you. For those of you who are new here, I want to say a very special welcome to you. Thank you so much for coming into my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that whenever I upload a video, you'll be first to get notified. And to all my returning travelers, I want to say thank you for your continued support. Now yesterday, guys, when we read the book, saw where, well, I got arrested for having assaulted Richard. He has had to get a lawyer. Now, Richard has been found to be trying to buy a lot close to Julie. But Richard also has a restraining order out on Mike. So Mike can't come a certain number of feet close to him. Now, I think this Richard is really looking for trouble. And even the dog, Singer, recognizes it. The Singer is not having any part to do with Richard at all. Julie and Mike's love affair has taken off. They are, doing their thing, getting closer and closer to each other. They have already done the do, and the two of them are essentially a couple, if you ask me. And then there is Andrea. Andrea is a little snake. Now, Andrea has taken up with Richard. And that makes me worry more for Julie, because oftentimes when your enemy wants to get close to you, they get close to somebody who's already close to you. So I'm a little worried when I see Andrea and Richard having gone to bed and all that stuff. I am worried that Richard could say something to Andrea, causing Andrea to, on his behalf, against Julie. So that situation right there, and considering that Julie works so closely with Andrea, the whole situation makes me nervous. But Emma had seen them out together and had seen them kiss. So Emma has told Julie, and that is setting Julie on a path to thinking, what in the world is going on, and not being so naive around somebody like Andrea. Could be very dangerous. So she seems to be in such a hot desire for a man, for Richard in particular, that I think she could be very, very dangerous for Julie. But we are going to continue reading. We are going to continue reading because we want to find out what else is happening. We see Richard trying to blackmail Julie by threatening to tell Mike that he had slept over at Julie's house, even though he was drunk and stayed on the couch. He's trying to make it seem as though there was something going on between them, so that would put a wrench in the relationship between Julie and Mike. He's trying everything to destroy Julie. Oftentimes they say, you are with somebody, you don't know who they are. When you leave them, that's when you find out exactly who they are. And since Julie decided to leave Richard, she has found out quite a bit that Richard is indeed a little snake. He's a very cruel person. He's like a narcissist, a very psychopathic person. Remember, he spoke about how he had lied about his foster brothers. He had cut himself and then had his foster brothers arrested for it. Remember, he spoke about how he had used the guidance counselor at school, and how when he was done with her, how he never spoke to her again because his use for her was over. He spoke about, not in length or not definitively, but so far I believe that he's responsible for the death of his father, We're gonna get back to that because I'm sure later on in the story he will reveal himself. He's a photographer and he's continuing to print pictures of Julie and look at them and be fascinated with them and be obsessed with the woman, so much so that he will not leave the woman alone. He's doing everything to ensure that their paths cross. But tonight we're going to continue reading. We're going to be reading from chapter 31 onward to see what else has happened between Julie and Mike, where Richard is concerned. Chapter 31. Though her shift started at 8, Jennifer was seated at the computer by 6 on Wednesday morning. The copy of the original arrest report on Mike Harris beside her. At the top of the report were the basics: Richard Franklin's name, address, phone number, place of work, and so forth. And she skimmed that part before reading the description of the altercation itself. As she had suspected, there was nothing helpful there about Richard's background, but it felt like the right thing to do. She needed something to help get the ball rolling. Her father, thank God, had been helpful the night before. After getting home, she had called him to get his impressions, and when she had finished, her father pretty much confirmed her thoughts, vague though they were, as to what might happen in the future. It could go either way, her father had said. So you gotta find out whether he's really nuts or just acting that way. She still wasn't sure where to begin, since the information on Richard Franklin was sketchy, and the hours she had to look into him weren't exactly standard business hours. The personnel department at the bridge project didn't open until later. Though that seemed the most obvious place to begin, her father had suggested she start with the landlord instead. They're used to evening calls, so it's okay to call after hours. Maybe you can pull up a social security number, driver's license number, as well as references. They usually require those on rental applications. And that was exactly what she had done. After getting the name of the owner of the property through an acquaintance who worked for the county, she spoke to the owner, a man who sounded no older than 30. The house, she learned, had been owned by his grandparents. The rent was always paid on time through his corporation, and Richard Franklin had put up both a security deposit and the first and last month's rent in advance. The owner himself had never met Richard. He hadn't even visited the property in over a year. The local real estate company was in charge of management, and he gave her that number. Next, she had called the manager, and after a bit of cajoling, he had faxed over the rental application. His references listed his local employer and the head of personnel. No one from Ohio or Colorado. She did manage to get his social security number and driver's license. And as she sat at Pete Gandy's desk, she typed those into the computer. She spent the next hour searching for information, beginning with North Carolina. Richard Franklin apparently had no criminal record in the state, nor had he been arrested. Though his driver's license had been issued in Ohio, it was too early to check with the Department of Motor Vehicles there. Ditto with Colorado. Then, using her laptop, she plugged into the high-speed phone line and checked the internet. Using standard search engines, she found about a zillion references to his name and quite a few personal web pages on Richard Franklin, but not the Richard Franklin she wanted. After that, she started running into roadblocks. To get information in Colorado and Ohio concerning a possible record would take at least a day in the cooperation of another department. Since police records were maintained locally, not so hard if she was an officer, but not really kosher for someone in training. Besides, they would have to call her back. And if they rang while she was out, which no doubt she would be, since she was riding with Pete Gandy today, she'd have to explain to the chief why she had a call why she had a call into the Denver and Columbus police departments, and she might be off the case entirely, if not out of a job. Then again, she wondered whether his past was what he claimed it was. Was he really from Denver originally? Julie thought so, but who really knew? His father had said as much. Her father had said as much last night. New in town and kind of psycho. I don't know that I'd put a lot. I don't know that I'd put a lot of stock in anything he said to this lady. If he's been good at skirting the law so far, I'm sure he's just as good at skirting the truth about his past. Though it was illegal, Jennifer decided to check his credit record. She knew there were 3 major credit reporting agencies, and most often a free report annually. Using the rental application as a guideline, she typed in the information required. No doubt the same information that the management company had used when renting him the home. Name, social security number, latest address, previous address, bank account number. She hit pay dirt. Richard Franklin's records were spelled out in plain detail over a number of pages. The only recent inquiry had been made by the management company for the house rental. No surprise there. But what struck her was that none of the records seemed to make much sense, especially for a gainfully employed engineer. There were no credit records currently registered or in use, no open auto loan, no personal credit lines. A quick scroll through the record showed that every account on the credit report had been closed. Studying the record in more details, she saw that there was one major default from a bank in Denver 4 years earlier. It was listed under real estate, and from the size of it, she assumed it was a mortgage on a home. There were a series of other late payments around that time: Visa, MasterCard, American Express, phone bill, electric bill, water bill, Sears card. All were registered as delinquent for a year, but were eventually paid off. Afterwards, he had closed the Visa and MasterCard accounts, as well as the American Express and Sears accounts. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, thinking about it. Okay, she knew he had lived in Denver at one point, and it seemed as if he had run into some sort of financial trouble 4 years ago. Could be any number of explanations for that. Lots of people weren't too good at managing money. He had mentioned to Julie that he had been divorced. Maybe that had something to do with it. She stared at the screen. But why weren't there any more recent entries? He was probably using the corporation to pay his bills, just as he was doing with his rental, she thought. She made a note to check in on it. What else? Without a doubt, she knew she also had to find out more about Jessica. But without further information, there was absolutely nothing to go on. Jennifer unplugged her laptop and stowed it in its padded case, wondering what to do next. Her best bet, she decided, was to wait until the personnel office opened so she could talk to the people there. Richard was a consultant engineer on a major project and working with a major company, so undoubtedly they had other references. Maybe one of them could shed light on what had happened 4 years ago, but that meant another hour of waiting. Not knowing what else to do, she scanned the arrest record again before finally focusing on his address and thinking, why not? She wasn't even sure what she was looking for exactly. She just wanted to see where he lived in the hopes that it might give her more of an impression of the man. Her computer tucked under her arm, she grabbed a cup of coffee on her way out the door and got into her car. Because she was still learning her way around, she checked the map in the glove compartment before following the main road out of town into the rural area of the country. 10 minutes later, Jennifer turned onto the gravel road where Richard Franklin lived. She slowed the car as she approached the mailbox, looking for a number, trying to estimate where she was. After finding it, she picked up speed again, seeing she had a ways to go. She was struck by how remote these houses were. Most sat on multiple acres, and she wondered why an engineer with a major city would choose to live out this way. It was convenient. It was convenient neither to town nor to his job, nor to anything else for that matter. And the road kept getting worse. As she drove further, the homes got older and more run down. More than one looked abandoned. She passed the ruins of an old tobacco barn. The sides had toppled over when the roof caved in, and Cusco blankets the structure, weaving through the boards. Behind it sat the remains of a tractor, rusting in the weeds. Another few minutes, another mailbox number. She was getting close now. Jennifer slowed the car. His house, she assumed, was the next one on the right, and she spotted it through the trees. Back from the road, the home was 2 stories, not as neglected as the others, but the yard was horribly overgrown. Still, people who lived out this way probably did so because it was family property or because they had no other choice. Why would he be chosen? Why would he have chosen a place like this? Because he wanted to hide? Or was hiding something? She didn't stop the car. Instead, she drove past and made a U-turn half a mile up the road. The same questions circled through her mind as she passed the house again and made her way back to the station. Richard Franklin drew back from the curtains, frowning slightly. He had a visitor, but he didn't recognize the car. It wasn't Mike or Julie, he knew. Neither of them owned a Honda, and he was certain they wouldn't have come to look for him there. Nor was it anyone who lived out that way. The road ended a couple of miles up. None of his neighbors owned a Honda. But someone had come. He had watched them creep up the road, driving way too slowly, knowing they were looking for something. Knowing they were looking for something. The U-turn had confirmed his suspicions. If it had been a wrong turn or someone's lost, they wouldn't have slowed in front of his house, and only his house, then sped up again. No, someone had come to see where he lived. What are you staring at? Andrea asked. Richard let the curtain fall back in place and turned. Nothing, he said. The sheet had slipped down, exposing her breast. He moved towards the bed and sat beside her. On her arms he could see bruises, and he ran a tender finger over them. Good morning, he said. Did you sleep well? In the morning light, wearing only jeans, Richard looked exotic, sensual. So what if he got a little rough last night? Andrea pushed aside a loose strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. When we finally got around to sleeping, I did. Are you hungry? A little, but I have to go to the bathroom first. Where is it again? I was kind of tipsy last night. It's the last door on the right. Andrea scooted from the bed, taking the sheet as she went. Her legs felt wobbly as she moved out of the room. Richard watched her go, wishing she had left the night before, then turned to the window again. Someone had come to see where he lived. Not Henry or Mabel either. He knew their cars as well. Who was it then? He rubbed his forehead. The police? Yes, he could imagine Julie calling them. She had been completely irrational yesterday, scared and angry, and now she was trying to take control by changing the rules of the game. But which officer had she called? Not Pete Gandy. He was sure of that. But how about the other one, the new one? What had Gandy said about her? That her father was a police officer in New York? He thought about it. Officer Romanello hadn't believed his account about the altercation in the bar. He could read that in her eyes, in the way she had watched him, and she was a woman. Yes, he decided, it must have been her. But would Gandhi be supporting her in this? No, not yet, he thought. And he would take care. He would take care to make sure that Gandhi wouldn't. Officer Gandhi was an idiot. He would be as easy to handle as Officer Dugan had been. One part of the problem solved. Now, as for Julie, Richard's thoughts were interrupted by a scream coming from Andrea's direction. When he went into the hallway, Andrea was standing still, staring with wide eyes, her hand over her mouth. She hadn't opened the door on the right, the one that led to the bathroom. She was staring into the room on the left, the dark room. She turned to look at Richard, as if seeing him for the first time. "Oh my God," she said. "Oh my God." Richard brought his finger to his lips. His eyes locked on her. When she saw the look on his face, Andrea took a step backwards. "You shouldn't have opened that door," Richard said. "I told you where the bathroom was, but you didn't listen." "Richard, the pictures." He took a step towards her. "This is so disappointing." "Richard," she whispered again, backing away. Jennifer made it back with a few minutes to spare. Thankfully, Gandhi hadn't arrived yet, and she went to his desk, knowing she didn't have much time. She jotted the number of the main office for the bridge project on a scrap of paper, then put the arrest record back in the file where it belonged. No need for Pete to see what she had been up to just yet. She dialed the number, and the secretary answered. After Jennifer explained who she was, she asked to speak to Jake Blanston and was put on hold. It was the man Mike had mentioned before. As she was waiting, Jennifer reminded herself to tread carefully. The last thing she wanted was for Richard to find out what she was doing. Nor did she want Mr. Blanston to call and complain to her chief or tell her she'd need a subpoena to get this type of information. Neither of those were options, so instead she decided to stretch the truth just a bit, under the ruse of verifying the arrest record. Jake Blanston came on the line, his voice busky and southern cured. As if he had smoked unfiltered cigarettes for 50 years. Jennifer identified herself as an officer in Swansboro, went through the customary small talk, and then segged into a brief recap of the incident. "I can't believe I misplaced the information regarding the arrest. And since I'm just starting, I don't want to get into any more trouble than I am already in. Nor do I want Mr. Franklin to think that we don't have our act together. We want to have the record complete in case he comes back in." She played the sheepish officer to the hilt, and though it was a shaky house of cards at best, Mr. Blanston didn't seem to notice or care. "I don't know how much I can help you," he said without hesitating, the words coming out in a slow drawl. "I'm just the foreman. You probably need to talk to corporate. They are the ones that have that kind of information on the consultants. They are in Ohio, but the secretary can get you the number." "Oh, I see. Well, maybe you can help." "I don't see how." "You worked with Richard Franklin, didn't you?" "Was he like?" For a moment, Jake Blanston was silent. Then, "Is this for real? Excuse me? You? This? Losing the incident report? Being with the police? All of this?" "Yes, of course. If you'd like, I can give you an extension and you can call me back. Or I could come out there." Jake Blanston drew a deep breath. "He's dangerous," he said in a low voice. "The company hired him because he keeps costs down, but he does it by scripting on safety. I've had men hurt out here because of him." "How so?" "He puts off maintenance. Things break. People get hurt. OSHA would have a field day here. One week it was one of the cranes. The next week it's a boiler in one of the barges. I even reported it to corporate and they promised to look into it. But I guess he found out and he came after me. He attacked you? No, but he threatened me in an indirect way. He started off like we were buddies, asking about the wife and the kids, things like that. And then he told me how disappointed he was that I didn't trust him, and that if I wasn't more careful, he'd have to let me go. All of this was my fault. He was doing me a big favor by trying to protect me. And he puts his arm over my shoulders, sort of mumbles that it would be a shame if there were any more accidents. The way he said it gave me the feeling he was talking about me and my family specifically. He gave me the creeps. To be honest, I was thrilled to see him go. I danced a jig the rest of the day, so did everyone else on the project. Wait, he left? Yeah, it's some out-of-town emergency, and when he got back to town, he let us know he needed to take some time off for personal reasons. I haven't seen him since. A minute later, after being transferred back to the secretary and getting the number in Ohio she needed, Jennifer hung up the phone and called the corporate headquarters. She got passed from one person to the next before she was finally told that the person she would help her was out temporarily but would be back later that afternoon. Jennifer jotted down the name of the man she should call, Casey Ferguson, and leaned back in her chair. Richard was dangerous, he had said. Right, but she already knew that. What else? Richard quit his job a month ago. He had told her and Pete something different. It wasn't something that would normally matter. But the timing didn't escape her. He had quit after coming back from the emergency. He had quit after Julie had told him she didn't want to see him anymore. A connection? Across the room, she saw Pete Gandy walk through the door. He hadn't seen her sitting at his desk, and she was glad of that. She needed just a moment more. Definitely too coincidental, she decided, especially after learning what she had earlier that morning about his past. But Julie, by her own admission, had seen Richard only a few times. And though he had called her on numerous occasions, he had never stayed on the phone long. Jennifer glanced out the window, wondering, what else had he been doing with his time since then? My God, I tell you all, Richard is scary. Richard is one scary person. I'm wondering if Richard took the life of his mother or the life of his first wife, Jessica, to get insurance money. Mike pulled his truck to a stop at the garage. The fog was finally beginning to thin. Julie was looking towards the floor of the truck, and he followed her gaze, coming to rest on the tips of her shoes. They were coated with a layer of dew from her lawn. And when Julie realized what she was looking at, she gave a half-hearted shrug, as if to say, guess we'll see what happens today. Neither had slept well. Both had spent the morning moving sluggishly. The night before, Mike couldn't seem to get comfortable, and he got up 4 times to get a glass of water. While he was up, he found himself drawn to the front window, where he stood for a long time, looking out. Julie, on the other hand, had spent the night dreaming. Though she couldn't remember any dreams in detail, she woke with a feeling of dread. That feeling lingered and returned in waves as she dressed and ate breakfast. When Julie got out of the car, she felt no more in control than she had felt earlier. Mike hugged and kissed her and offered to walk her across the street to the salon, but Julie declined. Singer, meanwhile, bounded down and headed toward the salon in search of his biscuit. I'll be fine, Julie assured him. She sounded doubtful and knew it. I know, he said, sounding equally unsure. I'll swing by in a little bit to see how you're doing, okay? As Mike headed into the garage, Julie took a deep breath and crossed the street. Downtown wasn't busy yet. The fog seemed to have set back everyone's clock just a little. But halfway across, she imagined that a car was suddenly speeding towards her, and she broke into a jog, trying to dart out of the way. Nothing was there. As soon as she reached the sidewalk, she adjusted her purse and looked again, trying to collect herself. Coffee, she thought. Another cup of coffee. I'll be fine. She swung into the diner. The waitress filled her cup from the pot on the warming burners. She added cream and sugar, spilling a bit on the counter. And as she reached for a napkin to wipe it up, she had the strange sensation that she was being watched by someone in the corner. Her stomach knotted as she turned in that direction, scanning a series of booths, some cluttered with the remains from earlier breakfast. But no one was there. She closed her eyes, on the verge of tears. She left the diner without saying goodbye. It was early. The salon wouldn't be open for another hour or so. But she was sure Mabel was already in. Wednesdays were her days for taking inventory and placing orders. And when Julie pushed open the door, she saw Mabel dutifully scanning the shelves of shampoos and conditioners. When Mabel glanced over her shoulder at Julie, her face assumed a lot of concern. A lot of concern. She set aside the clipboard. What happened? Were the first words out of her mouth. I look that bad, huh? Richard again? Julie bit her lip in answer. Mabel immediately crossed the room and put her arms around her, squeezing tightly. Julie inhaled sharply, fighting for control. She didn't want to break down. Aside from feeling scared, crying seemed to be the only thing she had been doing lately. And she was exhausted. So despite her efforts, she felt tears prick the back of her eyes, making them sting. A moment later, she was sobbing in Mabel's arms, her body shaking, her arms and legs so weak that she felt she would fall over if Mabel ever let go. There, Mabel murmured. Shh, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay, Julie. Julie had no idea how long she cried. By the end, her nose was red and her mascara had run. When Mabel finally let go of her, Julie sniffed and reached for a tissue. She told Mabel about seeing Richard near her house. She told her everything he had said and the way he had looked. She recounted her call to Officer Romanello and their conversation in the kitchen. Mabel's face expressed the depth of her concern and sympathy, but she said nothing. When Julie told her about Emma's phone call, Mabel shivered. I'll go give Andrea a call, Mabel offered quickly. Julie watched Mabel across the room and picked up the receiver. She offered a tentative smile that gradually gave way to a look of concern when it became obvious that Andrea wasn't answering. I'm sure she's already on her way in, Mabel said. She'll probably be here in just a minute or two. Or maybe she has decided to take one of her personal days. You know how she is. Wednesdays are usually fairly slow anyway. To Julie, it sounded almost as if Mabel was trying to convince herself. Jennifer spent part of the morning when she was supposed to be finishing Pete's reports, surreptitiously making calls to utility companies. Her suspicions were confirmed. Each bill had been paid to Richards Corporation, RPF Industrial Inc. All had been paid on time. From there, she called the Secretary of State's office in Denver and learned there was no company presently incorporated in that name, though there had been an RPF Industries Inc. had gone out of business a little more than 3 years ago. Acting on a hunch, she called the Secretary of State's office in Columbus, Ohio, and she learned that Richards Ohio Corporation had been incorporated a little more than a month before he began working with J.D. Blanchard Engineer, and also a week after RPF Industries had gone out of business in Colorado. Calls to the bank where his corporation had its accounts in Columbus provided little information. except for the fact that Richard Franklin did not have a personal checking or savings account registered there. Desk, Jennifer pondered this new information. To her, it seemed obvious that Richard Franklin had folded one business only to start another with a similar name in another state, and that afterwards he had made the decision to live his life with the lowest possible profile he could. Both decisions had been made at least 3 years earlier. Strange, he thought. Not criminal, but strange. Though she had first assumed that it might have been because he had been in trouble with the law, who else would go through this type of trouble to hide? And with all that was going on with Julie, it seemed obvious. She dismissed the notion. Low profile was one thing, invisible was another, and Richard Franklin could be found relatively easily by anyone willing to look for him, including the police. Simply look up his credit report, and the address was right there. So why all the cloak and dagger stuff? It didn't make sense. Jennifer checked the clock, hoping her call to J.D. Blanchard would shed some light on the subject. Unfortunately, she still had another couple of hours to wait. Pete Gandy entered the gym on his lunch break and saw Richard Franklin on the bench press. Richard worked through 6 reps. Not as much weight as Pete Gandy could do, but not bad. Then put the weight back on the bench. When Richard sat up, it took him just a moment to recognize Pete Gandy. "Hey, officer, how are you?" "Richard Franklin." Pete Gandy approached him. "I'm fine. How are you feeling?" "Getting better." Richard smiled. "I didn't know you work out here." I've been a member for years. I was thinking of joining. I got a trial membership today," he paused. "You want to work in a set while I recover?" "If you don't mind." "Not at all." A chance meeting followed by small talk. Then, a few minutes later, "Hey, Officer Gandy, call me Pete." "Pete," Richard said, "I just realized there was something I forgot to tell you the other night, and you probably know it. Just in case." "Yeah?" Richard explained. Then, as he was finishing, "Like I said, I wanted you to know, just in case." Walking away, he thought of Officer Dugan, his expression when Richard had opened his jacket. Idiot. Chapter 32. Julie would always remember it as the last normal day she would know, and that was in the general sense of the word, since nothing had seemed normal for weeks. Singer was strangely nervous at the shop. He paced restlessly between the chairs as Mabel and Julie worked. Customers came in, but none seemed particularly chatty. Julie supposed it was due to the fact that she didn't want to be there. She didn't want to be anywhere else either, for that matter, unless it was someplace far, far away. And assumed her clients picked up on that, especially the women. After the fog burned off, the temperature soared, and to make things worse, halfway through the morning, the air conditioner stopped working, which only added to the oppressive feel of the place. Mabel propped the door open with a brick, but because there wasn't so much as a slight breeze, it didn't seem to do much other than let the heat in. The ceiling fan was inadequate, and as the afternoon wore on, Julie was on the verge of breaking into a serious sweat. Her face had taken on a shiny glow, and she tugged irritably at the front of her blouse to fan her skin. She hadn't cried since Mabel had held her, and by the time Mike stopped by, she had composed herself enough to hide the fact that she had broken down again. She hated that she had succumbed this morning. She liked to imagine that she had been handling this with a quiet dignity. It was one thing to show Mike what she was really feeling. It was another thing to let everyone else know, even if they were friends. Since the morning, Mabel had been casting furtive glances her way, as if ready on a moment's notice to charge across the room with arms held wide in case she needed to be held again. It was sweet, but in the end, all it did was remind her of why she was so upset in the first place. And Andrea. She still hadn't shown up. After checking the appointment book, Mabel noticed that she had no appointments scheduled until late in the morning. So there were a couple of hours where she could still convince herself that Andrea was just taking the morning off. But as the hours passed and Andrea's customers began to show up, Julie's worries grew. Though she and Andrea weren't really friends, she hoped Andrea was okay, and she prayed she wasn't with Richard. She debated calling the police, but what would she say? That Andrea hadn't come in? She knew that the first question they would ask was whether her absence was unusual, and Andrea had always been flighty about coming to work. When did Richard and Andrea get to know each other anyway? During the haircut? There had obviously been some sort of attraction on Andrea's part, but from what Julie observed, Richard hadn't seemed to respond. No, she thought. His eyes has kept angling towards me while I worked. He looked at me then the same way he looked at me as soon as Edna had walked away. Andrea was with Richard. Emma had told Mike. I just saw him kiss her. It wasn't more than a few hours after she had seen him in the woods that Emma had called. Moreover, if they were together in Moorhead City, a half-hour drive from Swansboro, he might have gone from their little visit to meet Andrea. He did this, she thought, right after he told me that he loved me. It made no sense at all. Had Richard known that Emma was nearby? Though they had met only once, she had no doubt that Richard would recognize Emma again, and she wondered if it was intended as some sort of message for Emma to report back. But if it was a message, she couldn't figure out what it might be. If he had done it to lull her into a false sense of security, he was barking up the wrong tree. She wasn't about to fall for that one again. No way, no how. There was nothing he could do to surprise her anymore. At least, that's what she thought. On the phone with Casey Ferguson of J.D. Blanchard, Jennifer held her pen over her pad. Yes, of course, Ferguson said, continuing to stall. But we are not supposed to release this information. Personal files are confidential. I understand that, Jennifer said, shifting in her chair, doing her best to sound as serious as possible. But as I said, we are in the middle of an investigation. We have strict confidentiality agreements. The states require them for us when we contract with them. I understand, Jennifer said again. But if we have to, we'll subpoena the files. I just didn't want your company to be accused of obstructing any investigation. Is that a threat? No, of course not, Jennifer said. But she knew she had overplayed her hand when Ferguson spoke again. I'm sorry, I can't help, Casey Ferguson finally said. If there is a subpoena, then of course we'll be happy to cooperate. A moment later, he clicked off. Jennifer swore under her breath as she hung up the phone, wondering what she was going to do next. That night at Julie's, Mike took her hand and led her to the bedroom. They hadn't made love since the night before they had encountered Richard in the bar. Despite that, neither of them felt any sense of urgency. Their lovemaking was slow and tender, filled with gentle kisses. Afterwards, Mike held Julie close for a long time, his lips brushing against her skin between her shoulder blades. Julie drifted off until Mike's movements rose her from sleep. It was dark but early, not yet 10, and Mike was pulling on his jeans. Where are you going? I have to take Singer out. I think he's got to go. Julie stretched. How long did I sleep? Not long, just about an hour or so. Sorry. I liked it. It was nice listening to the way you were breathing. You must have been really tired. Julie smiled. I still am, but I'm going to grab a bite to eat. Do you want anything? Just an apple. That's it. No cheese or crackers or anything? No, I'm not all that hungry tonight. Just beet. He slipped out of the room as Julie sat up and turned on the lamp. Squinting as her eyes adjusted to the light, she rose and went to the chest of drawers to pull out a long t-shirt. Pulling the shirt over her head, she walked down the hall. Mike was standing in the doorway, waiting for Singer, and he glanced at her as she passed him on the way to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a yogurt and a couple of chocolate chip cookies, then grabbed an apple on her way back. It was while passing through the living room that she saw the locket, and she froze. It was on the desk near a calendar, partially hidden by a stack of catalogs, and the sight of it made her suddenly queasy. The locket brought with it images of Richard. How he had looked as he had given it to her, Richard suddenly grabbing for the door. Richard in the woods, waiting for her. She didn't want it in the house, but in all that had happened, she had forgotten that it was there. Now it was on the desk, and she had spotted it easily, without looking for it, without wanting to see it. Where had she seen it before now? Behind her, she could hear the clock ticking. From the corner of her eye, she could see Mike leaning against the door. The locket was reflecting the light from the lamp on the end table. It glowed somehow sinister. She realized her hands were shaking. The mail, she suddenly thought. Yes, that's it. When I put the stack of mail on the desk, it must have moved the locket somehow. She swallowed, right? She didn't know. All she knew was that she didn't want it in the house anymore. As ridiculous as she knew it was, it seemed evil to her now, as if touching it would somehow make Richard appear, but she had no choice. Forcing herself to move towards it, she reached over and slid it out from under the catalogs. It's just a locket, she told herself, nothing more. She considered throwing it in the garbage, but instead, she decided to stash it in her drawers and sell it at one of the local pawn shops later. When all this was settled, it wouldn't be worth much with her initials inside, but she'd get something for it, and she had put the money into the church basket on Sunday. She wasn't about to profit from the thing. The church would go to a good cause. She carried it with her to the bedroom and glanced at it as she was opening the drawer. The floral designs on the outside looked as if they had taken weeks to craft by someone who obviously cared a great deal about his work. Too bad, she thought. She'd be lucky if she got $50 for the thing. As she began moving her clothes to the side, she found her eyes drawn back to it again. The locket itself was the same, but something was different. Something. Her breath caught in her throat. No, she thought. Please, no. She unclasped the chain, knowing it was the only way to be certain. Moving towards the mirror in the bathroom, she drew both ends around the back of her neck, holding it in place where it would clasp. Then, looking into the mirror, she tried to steel herself for what was already obvious. The locket, which once nestled between the upper parts of her breast, now rested 2 inches higher on her chest. I'll get you a shorter chain, he had said. That way, you can wear it whenever you want. Julie suddenly felt dizzy, and she backed away from the mirror, letting go of the chain, as if it had clawed her fingers. The locket rumbled down her blouse. The locket tumbled down her blouse. My God, guys. I'm getting nervous for Julie, so nervous that I'm tripping over the words. The locket tumbled down her blouse before bouncing against the tile floor with a metallic ping. Still, she hadn't screamed. No. The scream didn't come from another couple of seconds. When she looked down at the locket, it had popped open in the fall. And from both sides, in pictures he had chosen especially for her, Richard was smiling back at her. This time, Jennifer Romanella wasn't alone when she came to Julie's house. Officer Pete Gandy was sitting at the kitchen table, looking across at them, not bothering to hide the dubious expression on his face. The locket was on the table, and Pete reached out to pick it up. "So let me get this straight," he said while opening the locket. "You beat the guy up, and as payback, he gives Julie a couple of pictures of himself? I don't get it." Mike clenched his hands beneath the table to keep from exploding. "I told you already. He's been stalking her." Pete nodded, but kept staring at the pictures. "Yeah, I know. You keep saying that, but I'm just trying to see if there are any other possibilities. Any possible angles." "Possible angles?" Mike asked. "Can't you see that this is proof right here? That he's been in the house? That's breaking and entering. But nothing seems to be missing. There were no signs of a break-in. All the doors were locked when you got home and the windows were closed. You said so yourself. We are not saying he took anything, and I don't know how he did it, but he did. All you have to do is open your eyes." Pete held up his hands. Now take it easy, Mike. Take it easy. No reason to get upset. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this." Both Jennifer and Julie were as teamed as Mike, but Pete had told Jennifer that he was going to handle this once and for all, and that she shouldn't say a word. Her expression was a mixture of horror and morbid fascination, especially after his own investigation this morning. Was it possible he could be this blind? Get to the bottom of this? "Yeah," Pete said. He leaned forward and put the locket back on the table. "Now I'm not saying that this doesn't seem a little fishy, because it does. And if Julie's telling the truth, then Richard Franklin has a little problem that's gonna require a visit from me." Mike's face tightened. "She's telling the truth," he said through gritted teeth. Pete ignored the comment and looked across the table at Julie. "Are you sure about something? Are you sure about everything, I should say? You are certain? You are certain that the only way Richard could have put these pictures in here is by breaking into your house?" She nodded. "And you said you hadn't so much as touched this necklace in the last few weeks?" "No," she said. "It was buried under some magazines on the desk." "Come on, Pete." "Mike, cut it. What's that got to do with anything?" Pete ignored the comment. His skeptical gaze still focused on Julie. "There's no other time that he could possibly have put those pictures in there?" He persisted. "No other time at all?" In the aftermath of his questions, the kitchen was strangely silent. Pete continued to stare, and under his not knowing gaze, Julie finally realized what he knew. She felt her stomach clenched. "What did he tell you?" she asked. "Tell him what?" Mike asked. When Julie finally answered, her voice was quiet but filled with loathing. "Did he give you a call and tell you he forgot to mention something?" she said. "Is that it? Or did he happen to run into you somewhere and bring it up then?" Pete said nothing, but he didn't have to. A sudden, almost imperceptible jerk of his head told her one of her guesses had been correct. Probably the latter, she thought. Richard would have wanted to tell him in person, so Pete could see him, so Pete could be fooled. Mike, meanwhile, was looking back and forth between Pete and Julie, trying to figure out what she was talking about. They had some sort of hidden communication going, one that left him feeling as if the whole situation were spinning out of control. "Could you please just answer the question?" Pete insisted, but Julie didn't answer right away. She continued to lock eyes with Pete. She did answer the question. Mike finally interjected. "No, there's no way. Julie barely heard him. Instead, she turned towards the window, staring blankly at the drawn curtains. Yes, she said flatly. There was one time he could have done it. Pete leaned back in his chair, his eyebrows raised. When he spent the night, you mean? What? Jennifer cried, her jaws dropping. What? Mike echoed. Julie turned to face him. Nothing happened between us, Mike, she said evenly. Nothing at all. His mama died and he was upset. And we talked, just talked. He fell asleep on the couch. That's what Pete is talking about. Though everything she had said was absolutely true, when she looked at Pete again, his expression confirmed that Richard had already implied something different. And Mike, Julie noticed, saw it too. Richard lowered the camera. With a telephoto lens, the camera served as a makeshift set of binoculars. And he had been watching Mike and Julie since they had come home that evening. Rather, what he could see of them through the gazing curtains. During the day, it was impossible to make out anything, but at night, when the lights blazed from inside, he could make out shadows. That was all he needed. This was the night she would find it. He had had to move the locket into better position after his meeting with Pete Gandhi, of course, but he had known she would see it on the desk. It would be nasty business, he knew, but there was no other way. It was time to end her little infatuation with Mike once and for all. You see, I tell you that this Richard is a little devil, narcissist at best, a psychopath. After Mike had closed the door behind the officers, he leaned against it, using both hands for support, as if he were about to be frisked. His head was bowed, and Julie could hear his long, deep breaths. Singer stood off to the side, gazing at him curiously, as if wondering whether this were some new type of game. Mike couldn't meet her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said, raising his chin. Still standing in the kitchen, Julie looked away. "I knew you'd be mad." Mike snorted, but she went on, as if she hadn't heard him. "But more than that, I knew it would hurt your feelings. There was no reason to do that. I swear to you, nothing happened at all. All he did was talk." Mike stood up straighter, then finally turned around, his expression angry and hard. Mike stood up. "That was the night for our first date, wasn't it? It was also," he remembered, "the night he had first tried to kiss her, but she hadn't let him." Julie nodded. "Nice timing, huh?" It wasn't the time for jokes. She regretted it immediately. She took a step forward. I didn't know he was going to stop by. I was just thinking of heading to bed when he came to the door." "And what? You just let him in?" "It wasn't like that. We had an argument because I told him I didn't want to see him anymore. He got kind of heated. And then, Singer," she paused. She didn't want to go into this. She didn't want to go into this at all because it seemed so pointless. "Singer, what?" Julie crossed her arms and shrugged. "Singer bit him. When I tried to close the door, he stopped it with his hand, and Singer went after him." Mike stared at her. "And you didn't think any of this was important enough to tell me? Even after everything that has happened?" "That's just it," she pleaded. "It wasn't important. I told him I didn't want to see him, and he got upset." Mike crossed his arms. "So let me get this straight. He comes to the door. You had a fight. Singer goes after him. Then you invite him in to spend the night? Correct me if I'm wrong, but your story doesn't seem to make a lot of sense." "Don't be like this, Mike. Please." "Be like what?" "Someone who is a little upset that you lied to me." "I didn't lie to you." "No? Then what do you call it?" "I didn't tell you because it didn't matter. It meant nothing, and nothing happened. It's not like all this is happening because of that night." "How did you know?" "Maybe that's what set him off in this direction." "But I didn't do anything but listen to him." Mike said nothing, and Julie saw the accusation in his eyes. "You don't believe me." she asked. What? Do you think I slept with him? Mike let the question hang for a long moment. I don't know what to think anymore. Julie flinched. Part of her wanting to lash out immediately, to scream at him, or demand that he leave, but she resisted those instincts, Richard's words echoing through her mind. I bet that you haven't even told him that you let me spend the night at your house. How do you think he'd feel about that? She suddenly knew that this too was part of Richard's plan. He was playing them, just as he had played Pete Gandhi, the way he had at the Clipper. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to keep her voice steady without anger. Is that what you think of me, Mike? That I'd sleep with a man I barely know on the same day I told him I didn't want to see him anymore? After I told you that I didn't even like the guy? After all the years you've known me, do you really believe I'd do something like that? Mike stared at Julie. I don't know. Tongue, and Julie felt her eyes tear up. You didn't sleep with him. Not, Mike finally said. He reached for the door, but it still hurts to think you didn't trust me with this, especially after all this stuff started happening. I do trust you, but I didn't want to hurt you. You just did, Julie. You just did. With that, he reached for the door and opened it, and for the first time, Julie realized that he was going to leave. Wait! Where are you going? Mike raised his hands. I need some time with this, okay? Please, she said. Don't go. I don't want to be alone tonight. He paused and took a deep breath. But a moment later, with a shake of his head, he was gone. Boy, the narcissist always seems to get their way. They just manipulate everybody. Every angle of the situation, they manipulate it to make sure it works in their favor. Lord, I pray God I never have to encounter anybody with that kind of character anymore in my life, because narcissists are despicable. They are despicable. Let us continue. I don't want Julie to be alone, so that's what Richard wants. Richard watched Mike make his way out. You see that? Richard watched Mike make his way down the walk and slam the door. He got in his socks. You see that? Now he knows that Julie is alone. He smiled, knowing that Julie would finally understand the truth about Mike, that she couldn't rely on him, that Mike was a person who acted on impulse and emotion, not reason, that Mike wasn't worthy of her, nor ever was, that she deserved someone stronger, smarter, someone equal to her love. In the tree, Richard couldn't wait for the moment until he led her out of this house, this town, this life she had let herself become trapped in. Raising the camera again, he watched Julie's shadow through the curtains in the living room. Even her shadow was beautiful.
Wow, guys, that is the end of chapter 32 of the book, of this book that we are reading, The Guardian, OMG. And boy, this book is intense. This book is absolutely intense. Julie is in for big trouble. Mike has good reason to be angry. What do you all think? I think Mike has good reason to be angry. He's probably thinking that Julie was behaving contrary to what he had led her to believe, that she had probably been with Richard intimately. And when you find yourself in those kinds of situations, it's very hard to convince the person that what they are thinking is not reality. Sometimes it's better you just leave it alone, because no matter what you say or how you say it, they're still going to believe that they're going to believe what they want to believe. No matter what, they're going to look at the circumstances, they're going to try to pick it apart, and they're going to find questions and doubts that they're going to ride on. So I don't know how is Julie, but I'm worried for Julie. I don't know what it is that Andrea has seen in that room at Richard's house. Oh Lord, I am worried for her. Because you see, when she said she get up in the morning, she had all those bruises on her. And he was like, oh, nothing is wrong if I got a little rough last night. He just justifies all of his dirty behavior. And I am wondering if he's a serial killer. I don't know. I just wonder if maybe he is. And that's why he has disappeared and is trying to not be seen or known about or stuff. But then he's talking about leading Julie out of this town. Go lead Julie too. Is he going to try to convince Julie that Mike is no good for her and then run off? That is going to destroy Julie's credibility or reputation, every doggone thing. Oh, I don't know, guys. I do not know. And I don't want to read anymore for tonight. Yeah, I don't want to read anymore for tonight. I want to chat. Yeah, I want to chat to you. When did you feel the earthquake? I want to chat to you all. So I'm not gonna be reading too much more about that because I don't want to knock the suspense out of it. We want to gather here again tomorrow and finish reading. We're not going to be finished and read a couple more chapters to see what is going to be the outcome. Is Richard going to harm Officer Romancello? Is he going to harm Andrea? Is he even going to harm Officer Pete? What is his plan? I don't know what he's planning. He seems so cynical. He seems so crazy. He seems so unpredictable that I don't know. But it's clear too that he broke into Julie's house. That night when he stayed at Julie's house, do you think he took a key? Do you think he took a spare key? Maybe when Julie was sleeping in the night, do you think he searched the house? Do you think that night when he went there, or if he didn't break into the house, did he have that shorter chain in his pocket and he changed it on the locket? Hey, Sister Lara, what's up you doing? How you doing, my love? I'm wondering if that was the night when he changed the length of the chain on the locket he had given to Julie. This man is cool. I mean, and that is how narcissists are, guys. That when you think that they are one way, when they are telling you they are doing one thing, they are doing something completely different. They're always trying to get you off guard. Julie is cynical and not seeing Richard for who he is. But I believe Julie realizes that Richard is no good. Who I think has injected themselves in a bad situation is Andrea. Andrea has injected herself in this situation in which she had absolutely no business. She had no business injecting herself into. All because she thought everything that glistened was gold. All because she saw that he had picked up Julie with a limousine and he had given Julie the locket and everything. She get ready. I am doing great, my love. Thank you, Sister Lur. I'm doing great. That is Andrea's problem. And you find that sometimes with some friends. They see a man started treating you good and stuff. They get jealous and want to inject themselves. And when you say you don't want to be with the man no more, you see how quick they jump at it. Jump to go be with him. You see how quick they jump in there. because they think, oh, you are crazy. But sometimes they don't know what they are jumping into. They might be jumping into the fight of their lives, but let them go on. Keep on. Let them keep on. That is Andrea right now. She's jumping in to that relationship with Richard when she has absolutely no clue. Because she's only looking at the material thing. She's looking at his body. She's looking at him. But Julie has great instincts. Julie says she's not feeling him. No matter what he did for her, the limousine, the nice picnic, the dinner, the this, the that, the beach, everything, she still was not feeling him. So we will wait to see. When we come back tomorrow, we are going to be reading some more and we will see what else has happened. What has happened between Andrea and Richard. All right, that's what we are going to be reading about tomorrow. So guys, as far as the reading is concerned, that is where we are going to end the reading for tonight. When we come back tomorrow, we will continue the reading of the book The Guardian, written by Nicholas Sparks. Until then, my friends, this is Jeff from Trevester, where your journey matters. Let us come back and chat. We'll chat about the hurricane. We're going to chat about Matthew Perry passing away. We're going to talk. All right?